Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to another drmyrnaminute. As we wait for some persons to hop on in, I'm listening to Changing Your Story by Jacqueline Carr. Good evening, and thanks for tuning in. We're just waiting for a few more persons to get on. Good evening. Good evening. We're listening to Jacqueline Carr, Changing Your Story. As tonight we will be discussing reauthoring your story. We're going to give it about another minute. Good evening. Good evening. She's saying that will not be your story no more. As we begin to discuss reauthoring in week 4 and continue to explore emotional scarring, prayerfully after this lesson, we will be able to embrace and reauthor our story so we can shift from living in a state of trauma to moving and shifting to a state of triumph through reauthoring our story. Let us go to the throne of grace. Oh, gracious and eternal God, we humble our hearts before you and we seek your face. We seek your continued guidance. We seek to continue to hear from you, oh God. For we know that you are a God who makes whole. You are a God who has the power to heal our brokenness. You are the God who's able to bind up our wounds. You are the God that's able to set us free, deliver us, and liberate us, oh God. Liberate us from the bondage of the past, oh God. Liberate us from the bondage of emotional scarring and things that occur in our life that continues to hold us captive. But on tonight, dear God, as you continue to reveal what it means to reauthor your story, so that we can shift, dear God, from living in the state of the past, living in the state of trauma, and be able to reauthor our story, oh God, to be able to see ourselves the way that you see us, the way that you intended us to be. For your word tells us in Jeremiah, before we were formed, you knew us, dear God. So we thank you, dear God, for knowing us. We thank you for forming us and creating us in your image, God. We thank you for making us fearfully and wonderfully made, created in your image, not the image of trauma, not the image of abandonment, not the image of rejection, not the image of fear. We thank you, oh God, and we continue to seek your face and to hear from you as you continue to place us on the path that you will have us to be, so we can walk in boldness and confidence, knowing that we are daughters and sons of yours, knowing that we deserve the very best out of life, knowing that we are more than our experiences of emotional trauma, dear God, knowing that we are more than what has happened to us in our past, oh God. We are more than the emotional scars, but we are daughters and sons of the Most High God, the God who restores, the God who delivers, the God who heals, the God who sets us free. So, God, tonight I pray that your word and this teaching, dear God, will be the beginning of that healing journey that sets free, that breaks and casts down strongholds so we can truly be who you've called and created us to be. In your Son, Jesus the Christ's name, we pray. Amen. I want to thank everyone for tuning in as we continue to enter into week 4 of Scars. And tonight we're going to lift up reauthoring, but scars is structure, condition, and causes, avoiding, reauthoring, and strengthening. And so tonight we're going to touch on reauthoring, right? Reauthoring helps us to acknowledge, to process, and to reframe the narrative where we can explore the trauma, explore the pain, explore the harmful experiences, etc. Through that process allows us to be empowered so that that experience no longer keeps us bound and shackled, right? So there will be a shifting when we're able to embrace the new narrative, when we recognize that we have the power to create a new narrative, when we recognize that we don't have to allow the past of these harmful experiences to keep us shackled. And so we don't want to be bound, right? Amen. We want to be free. And so we shift the experience of emotional scarring to launch us to becoming who God created us to be. For us to be able to see ourselves through God's eyes and not continue to see ourselves through the lens of the emotional scarring, right? Rather than realize that we have the power to change our the way we think, right? The way we allow our past and our experiences of emotional trauma sometimes to keep us bound, when we only see that and we're not able to see the abilities, right? The abilities to be healed from, right? So sometimes we can hold on to the emotional scarring and wear it like a comfort blanket because we know that and that's what's comfortable to us. It's not that the emotional scarring of the rape, the molestation, the abuse, the abandonment, the rejection, the domestic violence, or other traumas, even the trauma of racism, right, or any type of oppression, it does not mean that it go away and that it never happened. However, it's really about us being able to process. It's about us being able to explore, to express what we feel and what we think, right? So that we can begin to acknowledge our pain and shift from that. So I know it hurts. I know you didn't deserve it. And I know it wasn't your fault. But to only live through the emotional scarring causes us to be shackled to the pain and limits our future. It limits our ability to be and become and walk into what God is calling us to walk into. When we only see and live in the pain or the experience of the emotional scarring, it limits our full potential. It limits you from being who God has called you to be. It limits you from seeing your identity through God's eyes, right? Because sometimes when we experience these types of traumas, we only see ourselves through the lens of the trauma or the experience. But reauthoring helps us to acknowledge, to give voice to, and to honor your pain, right? To be able to acknowledge and to voice what you're feeling and what you're thinking and know that it's okay. So, whatever emotions come up for you, it's okay. But it's important to be able to get help so that we can process those feelings and those emotions so they no longer have power and control over us. Reauthoring helps us to face and to deal with our emotional scarring rather than cover them up or use external factors or remain to choose in a life where we become emotionally numb, right? We don't want to be emotionally numb and we don't want to just exist or just survive. We want to thrive. Reauthoring gives us permission to regulate our emotional response and unpack the weight of our experience. I know for myself, I have some weighted emotional scars, right? And I had to get counseling, and it was a process, it wasn't overnight. But the thing is to begin the journey so that the healing can occur, so that you can be able to see that you're more than that experience or that trauma that occurred. You're more than that emotional scarring. You are so much more than that. But it also highlights that we want to be able to live out loud. We want to be able to know who we are, accept ourselves, and be ourselves, which allows us to walk in the freedom and the liberation that Christ died for us. We want to be able to own that. Free to express what we feel and what we think. Free to give voice to the thing, whatever the thing is, whatever the emotional scarring is for you, to be able to name it, to be able to name the pain, name the hurt, name the people who caused it, and allow you to express your feelings and your thoughts around that thing, whatever that experience is, so that it no longer has control over you, right? We don't want the trauma to have control over us. We want to be able to unpack it. We want to be able to process. We want to be able to acknowledge it, right? Because the pain, the experience is not going to go away, but it's how we choose to deal with it, to be able to learn some healthy ways of coping with it, right? And so, yes, it hurts, right? But we don't want to allow the hurt or the pain to keep us stagnant or shackled in a sense where we can't truly become or be who God has created us to be. We want to also develop healthy ways of coping with the emotional scars. So instead of doing things that we talked about last week that causes self-harm, right, to ourselves, to our bodies, to our spirit, we want to be able to learn healthy ways of coping in order to deal with and manage, because the whole thing about reauthoring, you're learning how to manage, right? In life, things happen. We have to learn how to better manage and how to cope with. So, whatever that thing is, whatever that hurt or that pain is, it doesn't dictate our future. It doesn't dictate our steps. It does not dictate how we show up in the world, right? But to become empowered so that we can share it and acknowledge it, so that we no longer have to hold on to the guilt and shame associated with the trauma or the emotional scarring. So tonight, I want us to be encouraged to choose love, to choose to honor yourself, to choose to set healthy boundaries for yourself, to choose to be in the relationships that you desire to be in, to choose to walk in wholeness, to choose not to settle, right? Because sometimes, because of the emotional scarring that we've experienced, we choose to settle because we think that we're not good enough. But I want you to know that you are good enough. You are worthy and you are lovable. And whatever the emotional scarring is that caused hurt in your life does not have to continue to dictate what you accept from others and accept from yourself, for you to be able to fully see who you are and get to know you and love you. That way, we won't continue to accept counterfeit, right? Counterfeit ways of thinking, counterfeit relationships, right? We want the truth. And so we don't want to continue to feed our spirit and our mindset with negativity. Rather, we want to be able to feed it with positive ways of coping, with positive ways of thinking, with positive ways of showing up, right? When we reauthor our story, we give ourselves permission to embrace that we are created to become who God says we are, so we can be that and not be who someone else said that we were, right? So we don't have to be that thing or that scar that we may be living out of and re traumatizing ourselves. Reauthoring is the process of deconstructing to reconstructing. Reauthoring permits the deconstructing of inner shame and experience of harmful experiences and events that cause the trauma, right? And this allows us to reconstruct an identity that fosters self acceptance. And a lot of times, the emotional scarring causes us to not only armor ourselves, but it causes us to live in a fractured state where we don't really know who we are. We're bits of this and bits of that and bits of this, right? But all of it is based on external factors. It's based on the trauma. It's based on what someone else said rather than who does God say we are, right? Thereby shifting us from a fractured state to a liberated state, a cohesive state a cohesive self, because we are willing to become free from the emotional scarring that keeps us bound, right? This gives us permission to write, to say, and to move in the direction that we will have our lives to go in, right? Rather than continuing to live in a state of numbness, to continue to live in a state of armoring, to continue to live in a state of isolation, to continue to live in a state of shame and guilt, right? We want to be free from that, right? And again, the pain that you experienced it never goes away. It can't be erased, but we can learn how to process, right? We can go to counseling, we can get help, and we can learn healthy ways of coping so that we can process and unpack and uncover, right? The emotions that we may be feeling, the flashbacks of that emotional scarring. Put your thoughts in the chat. What comes up for you when you think about reauthoring your story? How do you think that you move forward in order to reauthor your story? Put your thoughts in the chat, right? Because reauthoring is all about empowerment, empowering us to not live in a state of being shackled by the past, right? Because when we do that, not only do we negate who God says we are, we live according to the trauma and the people who caused the hurt, right? And when we do that, they continue to have power and control over us. And with reauthoring, we want to have power and control over it, over the emotional scarring, right? And we do that when we're able to acknowledge, when we're able to process, when we're able to reframe and see that the emotional scarring is something that happened to us. It is a part of our experience, but it's not all of who we are, right? It's something that happened to us, but it's not who we are. Yes, to thine own self be true. We want to be able to walk in our authenticness, knowing who we are, not living a life that's defined by other people, defined by the trauma, defined by the hurt, defined by the rejection, right? Or the abandonment, whatever your emotional scarring is. We don't want to live or exist according to that, whatever that is for you, whatever that emotional scarring is for you. We don't want to live according to that, right? We want to live a life where we're able to thrive, where we're able to enter into healthy relationships, where we're able to love ourselves and accept ourselves and embrace all of ourselves, even the trauma. And when we meet on next Friday, we'll begin to unpack that, right? As we explore strengthening, because there will be a shift on how you see the scars, right? There will come a time where you're able to see the scars as something that pushed you forward, right? The scars are become beautiful to you because now you are not allowing those emotional scars or those hurts or those harms that you experience to define who you are. But the reauthoring process allows you to redefine yourself, not based on the trauma or the experiences that you encountered, right, by other persons. But you have permission to be free. You have permission to reauthor your story. You have permission to reframe. You have permission to acknowledge all of your feelings and your emotions and know that they're okay, however you feel, right? And when you process it, when we think of process it, it's not about processing it in a certain way, right? If you angry, be angry, express that anger, right? But be able to unpack that anger with a therapist in a safe and sacred space, right? Where you can be held, right? And supported on that healing journey. So, thereby shifting us from a fractured state to a liberative and cohesive state that affirms all the parts of us. We have to begin to love ourselves despite of the experience of the emotional scarring, right? So I am more than the sexual abuse and sexual trauma that happened to me. I am more than that. That's something that happened to me, but it's not who I am. And it does not dictate who I am or how I move or how I show up, right? Because I know that I am more than that. That's something that happened to me. No, it wasn't my fault, but I no longer give it power and control over me. Instead, I have power and control over it because I'm not walking in shame. I'm not walking in guilt because of something that someone else did to me, right? And that's the deconstructing the negative identity internalized through our emotional scarring and embracing our humanity, seeing ourselves through the eyes of God and not the event and not the trauma, right? Sometimes we can live in a state of guilt and shame because we only see the trauma, we only see the event, right? And I know that it's challenging, and I'm not saying that the journey is easy, but there is help available to get you to a place where you can process and you can work it out, right? Where you can learn healthier ways of coping, where you can begin to re identify yourself and deconstruct these negative ideas of who you are and what you are, right? That was placed on you by others. But in the reauthoring process, you get to state and say who you are, right? And that's the shifting because you are empowering yourself to be who you were always meant to be rather than continue to live through the lens of the trauma. Sometimes we can be shackled because we live constantly through the lens of the trauma, which can keep us stuck, which can keep us bound, which can permit us to enter into counterfeit relationships, relationships that are not healthy, right? That can permit us to use alcohol or sex or food or whatever other vices to be able to deal with the emotional scarring. But reauthoring teaches us how to live healthier, right? How to make better choices, how to process, how to acknowledge what you feel and know that whatever you feel is okay, and know that however you need to express your pain, it's okay. And that there are trained counselors and therapists out there specializing in trauma to journey alongside you as you process and as you unpack, right? And so it's really about being able to encourage you on this evening, right? Be encouraged and know that you no longer have to identify only with the trauma, with the emotional scarring, with the pain, with the rejection, with the abandonment, with the hurt, right? With the emotional abuse, with the physical abuse. You don't have to identify with that because you're more than that. That is an experience or experiences, but they still don't define who you are. So, just like I said last week, I want to encourage you to begin the process of healing, to begin the process of acknowledging your pain, right? And when we acknowledge our pain and where we're at, we honor our story. We honor where we are at and know that our feelings have value and they matter, right? No longer feeling like we have to hold them in, but that we can externalize what we feel and what we think, right? Related to the trauma or the emotional scarring, related to the disappointment, or whatever may have us in a place that keeps us shackled rather than moving forward so we can thrive in life rather than just exist or rather than just survive, or where we enter into relationships and we just settle, he's somebody or she's somebody, and maybe that's all I could get. So that's just what I'm gonna have. Right. But when we go through the process of reauthoring, we're able to recognize that we deserve the very best. Right. And we're also able to be reflect and go back and think about some of the things of that we did, maybe your behaviors or your actions and your deeds. The underlying reason behind that, right, was due to the emotional scarring, right? Sometimes we can allow the emotional scarring to lead and guide us rather than us leading ourselves because that's what's best for us. Recognizing that we, again, are once more than the experience and we are more than the emotional scarring. We are so much more. And I want to encourage you that you no longer have to settle and that help is available, right? And so when you're looking for a therapist or a counselor, look to someone who's trained in trauma, right? They have the training and the skill sets that's needed to be able to journey alongside you to healing, to wholeness, right? And I'm not saying that it's going to be an easy process. I'm not saying that it's going to be an overnight process. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is, whatever the process, you're worth it. You're worth the journey. You are so valuable and you matter. What you feel matter and what you think matters, right? So be encouraged and know that this is not the end, right? That you are more than that experience. You are more than the pain inflicted on you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And there is a God, the God that loves you, right? And created you to be whole and to walk in wholeness and to walk in healing rather than to remain fragmented and broken, right? So I just want to encourage you. And as we close, I want to share some of the lyrics that we listened to while we were waiting. God is changing your story from failure to success, from bound to freedom, from lack to the abundance, from defeated to winning. He's releasing healing right now. God came to pull you where you belong, right? And I hope that is encouraging for someone to know that they don't have to stay where they're at. They don't have to remain shackled. You don't have to only see yourself through the event of the trauma or the pain or whatever caused the emotional scarring. You don't have to stay there. I want you to be encouraged and begin the healing journey of reauthoring your story, right? Healing is possible. And I know for myself, I would have never been able to make it where I am right now if I had not got the help that I needed to reauthor my story, right? To see myself as more than a victim, right? To see myself as more than the trauma, as more than the abuse, right? More than that, to be able to see myself through God's eyes and learn how to love myself. And when we love ourselves, we won't accept anything, right? We won't settle for counterfeit. We'll be able to show up and be bold and confident and know that we are fearfully and wonderfully made and know that we don't have to settle and that we deserve the very best. We deserve to live the very best, meaning showing up for yourself, being confident and bold in every area of your life. And when I say sometimes we can even just accept jobs because we think that that's all we deserve, or we may have a career but we only accept a little bit of money because that's how we value ourselves. But reauthoring your story helps you to see your true value, your true worth, right? And so be encouraged and begin the healing journey. At MHT Family Life Center, transformation takes place. It is where transformation takes place, right? And we're located in Riverdale, Georgia. But if you live out of states, you could use psychologytoday.com and find a therapist that specializes in trauma, right? Or you can search on Google, right? Be encouraged. Know that you are valuable and that you are worthy and that you are more than your experience of trauma or traumas. You are more than your emotional scarring. You are more than that pain and that hurt. You are more than the abandonment and the experience of rejection. You are so much more than that. right? You are more than that. I want to encourage you to begin the healing journey and know that you can be and become who God desires you to be and become. And it's very important that we begin to love ourselves and see ourselves through a different lens rather than only the lens of the experience of the emotional scars. So you be blessed and know that I am available to support you if you're in the metro Atlanta area. If not, look up Psychology Today and look for a trauma trained therapist. Okay? You be blessed, enjoy your weekend, and know that you have the ability to choose to begin the healing journey and process and acknowledge for you. It's not about anybody else, it's all about you. Because in the reauthoring story, that model allows you begin to process forgiveness, forgiveness of yourself, forgiving yourself for the harm that was inflicted on you by somebody else. You be blessed, enjoy your weekend, hold your head up high, right? And continue to walk into who God is calling you to walk in. Be blessed and have a fabulous weekend.